just gets getting worse and worse, it seems. And at the end here, now we're done with it. When we finished with Samson, we finished the deliverers that God sent to deliver, and then we get into 5 chapters to end the book. And it's not in chronological order at all now. He takes us, I believe, in the time to see what was happening in the book. It's kind of an appendix to the book of Judges. And you'll see some things in here that you just shake your head at and say, how did this happen? But today we'll deal with that. And I think chapters 17 and 18, which we're taking today, it just shows religious decay and apostasy. Going from what God had ordered to going to everybody just doing what you want. And then in chapters 19 to 20, which we'll do next week, Lord willing, just what follows spiritual decline is moral. Morally, you fall. And next week we'll deal with that. I encourage you to read 19 to 20. I'll let you decide for yourself if you want your child up here. We can have a special class downstairs next week for them if you feel that would be more appropriate. And I won't be very explicit, but we'll talk about some of the issues there. So I encourage you to read that ahead of time. So this is kind of an appendix to the book. Kind of, if you keep that, there's a real lack of real consciousness of God as their king. And I think Gideon brought it up, that the Lord is king. And it states, again, the main theme throughout is that there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so we'll pick it up here in the beginning of 17. Maybe you haven't heard a sermon on this chapter. There is a good one out there if you go on YouTube, and Paris Reedhead is a preacher. I think he's dead now, but he preached a message called 10 shekels in a shirt from this story. I encourage you to listen to it. 10 shekels in a shirt. All right, we'll begin here in chapter 17, verse 1. Now there was a man from the mountains of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, "The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and on which you put a curse, even saying it in my ears, here it is. Here is the silver with me. I took it." Right off the bat, it's not a very good picture. Apparently, Micah had stolen 1,100 shekels from his mother, that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money weighed out. And he takes it from her, and he hears the curse she had cursed. The person who had taken it, so on, and he'd heard that, and I don't know if that scared him or what. And so eventually he said the curse in my ears. He says, "Here's the silver with me. It's with me. I took it." So he makes a confession that he takes it. And after she's cursed for taking it, look at the response here. And his mother said to him, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my son." Instead of kind of giving a little whooping there for thievery, she says, "God bless you." I mean, it's a good thing he confessed, but still there should be some kind of a punishment for stealing the money and so on. But she says, and his mother said, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my son." So when he had returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I had wholly dedicated the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son, to make a carved image and a molded image. Now therefore I will return it to you. Thus he returned the silver to his mother. Then his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to the silversmith, and he made it into a carved image and a molded image. And they were in the house of Micah. Then Micah had a shrine and made an ephod, or an ephod, depending on how you say it, and a household idols, and he consecrated one of his sons who became his priest. In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So again, the theme is here before us again today. Just so you get an idea of how much money 1,100 shekels were. Later on, we're going to see in a few minutes a Levite he hired for 10 shekels a year, plus room and board. and a change of clothes. 10 shekels a year for this priest. And so they take 200 of these shekels and give it to the silversmith. Well, guess who came out pretty good there? The silversmiths. You get to the New Testament, and Paul preaches against these idols, right? He begins to turn, he says, tell the people, turn away from these idols to serve the living and true God. He got in trouble for it because all the silversmiths get there and they said, listen, we're going to run out of business. This guy keeps preaching against what we're doing. We're going to make, we aren't going to be able to sell this to churches anymore, our little statues and things. And we're going to be bankrupt, belly up our business. But here, this guy made up pretty good. And you just see the spiritual decline here that was happening during the days of the judges here. And one of the Ten Commandments, they begin this way in Exodus 20, verses 3 and 4. You shall have no other gods before me. The second commandment is this: you shall not make for yourself a carved image or a likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that is on the earth beneath, that is in the water, or under the earth. I think it's pretty clear that God doesn't want us making statues and idols and things and worship these things, because that's what ends up happening with them. It doesn't say that he made it as an idol to Baal in the story. I believe he tried to honor the living God maybe with these things. Whatever the reason was, partly the reason you can't make an idol of something, they made a golden calf, coming out of Egypt. This is the God that you delivered you. God didn't want any of that, because what one animal or what one thing in heaven above can you compare God to? And even if you find a pretty good animal that represents something well, it's so far below what God is, who he is. And so he said, listen, don't make anything that resembles anything like in heaven or beneath, or on the earth, or in the water, or beneath the earth. Don't make anything a graven image like this. It's a commandment. It's the second commandment that we have in the Bible. And so here you find Micah and his mother dedicated to the Lord. Notice he uses the Lord, Yahweh. He's not to a Baal or anybody else. But this shows you how far deteriorated things have fallen spiritually. Where actually this was what God said here, is the second commandment is broken, and they act like it's no big deal. In fact, let's pay out a lot of money for this. 200 shekels. Had lasted that Levite for a long time. And the silversmith made on. And how stupid is it to make idols and to pray for them? You got to carry them everywhere you go. They can't walk themselves. Aren't you glad God just not like that? In fact, Jeremiah Isaiah makes fun of the people who he says, you make this, you cut down a tree. A lot of the wood you burn in the fire to keep warm and to cook and stuff. And there's another part you make this little image, an idol, and then you bow down to it and you pray to it. How stupid can you be? He said, can't walk by itself. You have to carry it wherever it goes. And just kind of taunting how ridiculous it is to make these idols to sit down, kneel down and worship him. Deuteronomy 27:15, in case you didn't get it the first time, that command should be enough. He says this: cursed is the one who makes a carved or a molded image, an abomination to the Lord, the work of the hands of a craftsman, and sets it up in secret. And all the people shall answer and say, Amen. This is like when Moses was giving out in different Deuteronomy, he would say one thing and the people would respond and say, we agree, Amen. And so he gets to this about making a carved image in Deuteronomy 27:15. Cursed is the one who makes a carved image and a molded image. You think it can be any clearer? It's an abomination to the Lord. And yet now it's a thing in these days when everybody was doing what was right and God wasn't in his throne, as it were, in the Israel here. Everybody did what was right in his own eyes. And then he collected this religious stuff. He had his own personal shrine in his home. He somehow had or made an ephod, which the priest was to wear. And he had the golden, or these molded images. What else did he have? Oh, and he didn't have a Levite. The Levites were supposed to be priests, but he used his own sons as a priest. Had his own thing going here, his own religion, I guess, or what. Thought he was doing right. A rival shrine to the one in Shiloh, which God had made there the place at the time to worship. But verse 6 says, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And I found an interesting verse when I was preparing this week. In Deuteronomy 12:8, it says, you shall, and they hadn't entered the promised land yet. He's saying, when you go there, I want you to destroy all the images you see. And if there's a shrine on top of a hill and an altar there, I want you to totally wipe it out. I want the memory of these gods to be wiped out from the land. And it keeps going on. He's talking about the future, the time we're in here in Judges. And this is a comment he makes here. You shall not all of you do as you are doing here today, every man doing what is right in his own eyes. See, he's talking about, I'm going to come up and I'm going to set up my place of worship. It's going to be where I appoint. That's where I want you to do it. I don't want you doing your own thing on your own hills and stuff like we have maybe been doing till now. He said, so every man, Deuteronomy 12:8 again, you shall not all do as we have been doing here today, every man doing what is right in his own eyes. I think they lost the fact that God was there to be their king. And every man, rather than have God rule over them, was doing that which was right in his own eyes instead. You heard it said maybe this way today in our day. There's no right and wrong. If it feels good, do it. If it feels good to you to do it, who am I to tell you it's wrong? You do what feels right to you. And they weren't following God's laws, his government. Let me just ask you a question. Who's your king today? Who's your king? Do you have a king? Is it God? Is God your king? Does he rule? Do you follow his laws? I sure hope so, because it's worth having him as a king. Look at the chaos you get into when he's not. And so I've heard this expression, maybe you have too. Well, I worship God in my own way. You do, huh? Well, that's idolatry. You're doing it in your way. And I hear it used for many different things. Oh, I don't go to church. I worship God on my deer stand. People that have told me that one, it's usually because they're avid hunters and they're going to miss church anyway, and it's their excuse. Well, I'd rather be in the field, and I might say a prayer while I'm out there and look at God's creation, and then they go on about creation and how lovely it is, and how it's all the time forsaking the assembling of himself together or whatever. But I worship God in my own way. That's the problem, as we worship God in our own way. And you can't do that. God says, though that worship me, there's a time coming, Jesus said when he was walking the face, you're not going to say in this mountain we worship him, or in that mountain. For they that worship him in spirit and in truth. And if that isn't the way you worship God, you're going to fall into all kinds of things. He's ordered a way. And so let's read on here, verse 7 now. Now there was two people come into the picture here, Micah and his family, and then this person. Now there was a young man from the Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah. He was a Levite and was staying there. The man departed from the city of Bethlehem in Judah to stay where he could find a place. Then he came to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed. And Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" So he said, "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm on my way to find a place to stay." Micah said to him, "Dwell with me, and be a father and a priest to me. And I will give you 10 shekels of silver, a suit of clothes, and your sustenance." So the Levite went in. Then the Levite was content to dwell with the man. And the young man became like one of his sons to him. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will do me good, since I have a Levite as a priest." That fixes everything, doesn't it? I have a professional. I have somebody that God's appointed to be a priest in my home. So this, I think, I don't know, the priests, the Levites, maybe I don't understand it all, but they had 48 cities. they were given. They were not to receive an inheritance of property in the land. So I just think with this kind of decay spiritually, that probably people weren't paying their 10%. And the Levites were probably getting left out, and this guy's looking for a job, someplace to live, because he probably wasn't being taken care of. Levites were supported too, largely from the rest of the other tribes who had land, who had inheritance, and so on. And so anyway, whatever the reason is, he's out looking for a place to live, and not in one of those 48 cities or anything again. But he comes to Micah's house, and Micah said, wow, I could use you. It'd be great to have a priest here. And he says, probably I can't give you much. I can give you a room and board. I'll give you a new suit of clothes every year and 10 shekels to go with it. And for this guy, he was plenty satisfied. And then he says this, the Levite in verse 11, the Levite was content to dwell with the man. How far things had fallen. He was going to even be content with idol worship, being a part of it. But hey, his needs were met. And then the thinking here of Micah is, now I know that the Lord will do me good since I have a Levite as a priest. And maybe that's the only reason he wanted a priest, that the Lord would do him good, that he would prosper. And I think the idea here is using God for gain. He buys a priest, as it were, so that God will do him good. And in 1 Timothy 6:5, Paul dealt with this teaching kind of as a way, and he says, watch out for these teachers, they're useless wranglings of men of corrupt minds, destitute of the truth, who suppose that godliness is a means of gain. From such withdraw yourself, he says. Now I know that God will do me good since I have a Levite for a priest. And still steeped in idolatry and so on, but God's going to prosper me now. And maybe people do that in different ways. Well, if I go to church at least this many times a month, God has to do me. I've heard people use those terminology. God's got to really do me. I did something for him, he's got to do something for me. Or even some tough guys I know wear a tattoo of a cross and so on, and think that that's a cure-all for anything. You can live like you want, but hey, I got a cross tattooed on my arm. That'll protect me. You know, now God will do me good because I'm sticking up for him. When you think about it, it's just insane anyway. And so the finish is 17, and we'll get into 18. And the third kind of group of people here are tribe of Dan, a few people coming out. And let's begin in 18:1. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Bringing that to the front again. In those days, the tribe of Danite was seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in. For until that day, their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen to them. So the children of Dan sent 5 men of their family from their territory, men of valor, from Zorah and Eshtaol. That's where Samson was from, remember, the tribe of Dan. To spy out the land and to search it. And they said to them, go and search the land. So they went to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. And while they were there at the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of a young Levite. And they turned aside and said to him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? And what do you have here? This is quite an interesting story. These 5 guys are men of valor going out to look for property. They couldn't take enough away from the Philistines where they lived. And so they seek another place, and they're going out to spy some place that they can possess as a land, which they should have done a long time ago. But they're going to look for it, and they're saying at Micah's house, hospitality is pretty good compared to what we'll hear next week. But he puts them up, and while he's there, they listen to this accent of this guy speaking there, this Levite. Somehow they heard him, and they recognized his voice, having the accent of the tribe, people of the tribe of Dan, and they're inquiring, man, what's happening? What's up? How'd you get here and all that? In verse 4, and he said to them, thus and so Micah did for me, He has hired me, and I have become his priest. And he said to them, please inquire of God, that we may know whether our journey on which we go will be prosperous. So now they want to know, hey, are we going to prosper on our journey? And the priest said to them, go in peace. The presence of the Lord be with you on your way. Doesn't say that he even inquired. Oh, yeah, go, man, go. They probably heard what they wanted to hear, and he gave what they wanted to hear. And the priest said, go in the presence of the Lord be with you on your way. So the 5 men departed and went to Laish. And they saw the people who were there, how they dwelt in safety in a manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. There was no rulers in the land who might put them to shame for anything. They were far from the Sidonians, and they had no dealings with anyone. And so this is quite a situation. They saw the land they were looking for. Hey, where's a good spot, man? This looks like good farming land. Let's take this area. Look at the people that live here. They don't really have ties with anybody. I think this would be an easy people to conquer. And man, this land is rich. It's fertile. Let's take that one. So the spies, they go back home and they report to their family. And they report to them and say, hey, listen, the land we saw is awesome. Let's go in and possess it. And so the tribe of Dan decides, you know what? We're going to send out 600 valiant warriors with you and take over that land. So they send 600 men with them. And they're going north again to Ephraim. And again, they stop by the house. They're going to do the same thing. Stop by the house of Micah. And they told him, hey, here there's a Levite here from our tribe. As they go to Micah's house. Micah apparently wasn't home at the time. Was out maybe working or something, but he didn't see the 600 men, didn't know anything about it yet, coming to his area. And then these 5 guys go into his house and they steal from him. You know, Micah was a thief, and now he's reaping what he sowed. The others are coming in and they're taking the ephod. They take the images that this silversmith had made and so on. His shrine, basically stealing all his things, bringing that into the tribe, and then stealing the Levite from him too. And the Levites question him, what are you doing? I say, hey, just be quiet, just stay with us. And eventually they said, what's better, to be a priest to one family, or to be a priest to a tribe? Well, God got his ear. I'm sure he got a little better price too for it. And it says that his heart was glad. He was glad. He was again content. He's getting more pay. Better pay. And now he's going to be a priest to a tribe. And so he seems to go whatever works best for him. And they leave this area and they're starting to leave on their journey to go over and take over this area of Laish. And then the neighbors of Micah hear what happened, and they get him together with a group of neighbors, and they pursue the military guys, the tribe of Dan, and they catch up to him, and Micah says, hey, what's the problem here? You steal my golden images. You know, he probably told him how much it was worth. My mom paid $200 for that, and shekels. And then on top of that, you take my priest, and you stole everything from me. And one of the guys says, you better keep your mouth shut here. One of these valiant warriors over here might come off and just lop your head off. Just be careful how you answer us now. The guy must have taken a good look. He with his neighbors, just a few, and these valiant warriors from Dan, he took a look and he got real smart. And he decided, I better go home before I get hurt. I better accept my losses. And he goes, and think of what he said earlier. Now I know that the Lord will do me good because I have a Levite for a priest. How'd that work out? He lost everything. Lost it all. And now he's going home empty, as it were, of all that he put his confidence in his worship of God and how things are to be done. And he goes with this tribe. And then the Levite, he's just content to be there. Then the tribe, they go in and they destroy the city of Laish and take over. They destroyed the city, burned it with fire, but rebuilt it. And they called the name of the city Dan, after their ancestor and after the name of their town. And it was right at the headwaters of the Jordan River. And that's where it gets its actually name. I found that interesting. The headwaters at Mount Hermon there, where the tribe set up in a lush area, farming and so on. But it's the headwaters of the Jordan River, and that's why it's called Jordan, because Dan settled there, and it's out of Dan, Jordan. The Jordan River gives its name. So that's pretty fascinating there. But in this book, you see they cried out to the Lord. You know, they used the name, they prayed to the Lord. They dedicated money to the Lord, the woman said. They desired favor of the Lord. They were inquiring for his divine will. In several places, anyway, you hear the name of the Lord. Though he's mentioned a lot in this book and they speak of him, their actions sure don't honor him. I think it's like, was it Jeremiah or was it Isaiah? I can never remember the two, but he said, this people, they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And I think that's what I see in this area. This is what happens to God's people when they don't press on. And make a little compromise here, a little compromise there, and pretty soon the things that God said were an abomination, they're bringing into the church. They know it's wrong, but pretty soon it's comfortable, and pretty soon everybody's doing it. And even the priests are content to live in that situation as long as they get their pay, change of apparel, and a little spending money. And how far can you go? What a lesson here to us as we end the book of Judges of God spare us from this. I don't want my family to go that direction. Generations later, it says that at the end of the book here, it says in verse 30, then the children of Dan set up for themselves a carved image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. And somebody was pointing out, at least one commentator, that this was Moses' grandson. How far a generation can fall, from where Moses was. And I know our grandpa prayed when he was saved, the first one saved in our relation, but he prayed for his kids and the next generation and the next generation that they would serve God. I thought, why can't we? I prayed that for my kids. I prayed for my grandkids, and should the Lord tarry, I prayed for great grandkids and on down the line, that it not turn out like it is here, apostasy, of falling away from God, forgetting God, serving other idols and other things. And yes, God, and again I repeat this, that God is the real hero of this book, because God is the one who puts up with all of this, and he has mercy still. Even sends them, what we just read, in this is the way things were until they went into captivity, and even that is the mercy of God. And who does the Lord discipline? The Lord disciplines those he loves. And he loved Israel. And so he sends them into captivity. It's in captivity where they begin to see, we've sinned. And they look back to God and so on. But what a difference. The story of Micah and his Levite represent apostasy and the degeneration of Israelite society. Full of self-interest, everybody just doing what was right in his own eyes, caring only about themselves. Instead, how are we taught to pray? Jesus taught us, thy will be done. Your kingdom come. We're busy with our little world, what we want in this life. We got it all our life planned out when we're young. I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that. And God's sitting there all saying, what about me? What about me? Who is your king? Who's your king? In order to make him your king, you kind of have to have a coronation service just like they do when they install a new king. Maybe you've seen that picture explaining the gospel sometimes, and you see this little throne with you sitting on it, because you're calling the shots in your life. And then it's an explanation of how we've sinned and so on, and how God, and then it shows an empty throne where God should be sitting on. And it's kind of an explanation of what we are to have, that God calls us shots, that this is what we follow. I just read yesterday morning, remember Paul was kicked out of Thessalonica and he goes to Berea. And it says that the people, the Christian, or the people there, the Jewish people, when Paul went to the synagogue, it said they were more noble than those of Thessalonica. Why? Because when Paul preached to them, they searched the scriptures to find out if what Paul was saying was really true. And then it says, therefore, the next word, therefore many believed on him there. The reason people believed is because they went to this book and they searched the scripture to see if what Paul was teaching was right. And they came to the conclusion, wow, he is right. And they turned, therefore many believed, including some really influential Greek women there. And not a few men, it says. Awesome thing. And so let's make sure and plead with God. God, don't let us depart from your laws. Yes, everybody's doing this in the church today. Well, what does it say? God, we want to follow you. It leads to leadership like this Levite. It leads to spiritual decay and decline. And as we'll see next week, which leads to moral decline in all areas of life, full of self-interest and so on. And so my prayer is God save us from this. This is written, I believe it's written here so that we press on. God, spare us from that. It's a dark time in Israel's history. But God, for the mercy of God, we'd be there too. But let's pray for one another. Pray and stir each other up to love and to good works. Pray for one another and say, hey, brother or sister, we need to press on to mature in this. And in the book of Hebrews, he writes and he tells the people, the Christians, that by this time, he says, you ought to be teachers. And you still have need that somebody teaches you the basic principles of the Christian life. And so we need to move on into maturity. And not be like Micah or the Levite or even the tribe of Dan. Just doing what was right. In their own eyes, tacking God onto everything, but not having a heart for God. If you don't have a heart for God today, ask God. Tell him that. Tell him, Lord, I don't feel. Do you do that? I do that when I don't feel like praying. I approach God. I'm honest, he knows anyway. Lord, I sure don't feel like praying right now, and I'm having a hard time focusing. Would you help me? So that I love him better every day. Let's pray. Father, we thank you, even for this dark time in the history of Israel, Lord, where there was no king. You weren't enthroned in their life, and everybody did just what was right in their own eyes and made up their own concoction of what religion should be, what walking with you meant, and it was so far. It was an abomination to you, and yet you put up with it. And you did something about it out of love too. And you disciplined them. And you discipline us, Lord. Thank you that's out of love. But oh God, give us a burning desire to say, we don't want this to happen to us or to our children or our great-grandchildren or any down the line. Oh God, help us to be real with our walk with you. Help us to be honest. But move in our hearts. Oh Spirit of God, come upon us. And give us that desire to press on, to be spiritually mature, so we don't fall into this kind of apostasy and then moral decay. We thank you that this book is in here and it's meant for it's inspired by you and it's meant for our good. So help us to learn the lessons from these times, Lord, lest we repeat them. I ask this in Jesus' mighty name and for his sake, in your glory. Amen. Amen.